Islam. Greetings. Let's see if we can finish this up. We can do this a little quicker. Um, we're going to look at a 5-minute video in a minute. And let's continue. So to recap, got the Muslim in Brazil, as they call it. Now, we see you got the carnival wax wood from this tree, which is allegorical for Brazil. Every time you see this in paintings, it's the carnival wax tree, well known in the trade of the Moors. And see that staff? Yeah, that's some more about type stuff right there. Probably weather controlling. That's a site that they find, which we already know why, but they find sites like this all the time. And as soon as they find, you got Roman archaeologists who are gonna come and place their own understanding over it. Like this one, called the first free Cameroon city in America. So every time they find another one, like gonna be the first free Cameroon city, because they would never admit that. Just this, what these videos were saying that this is the ancient Kingdom of Fez. They ain't gonna admit that, which would make more sense that why they finding these shit. But they're gonna again start the story off with shipwrecked Africans. They can't say they've been slaves because slaves don't boast cities and have administration, government, and stuff like that. But they find evidence that there's been a city, running like a city, like we do today. They gotta say shipwrecked Cameroon. We even do that when we ignorant of our true history, nationality, and birthrights. We're gonna see that later by Johnny Aborigine. So we help Rome with the reconstruction by our ignorance. They make scientific coffee on the historical rescue of, you see they call him a rescue, Diego Cargas and Santiago del Príncipe. With this information, we limit the possible territory where Santiago del Príncipe could have been located, with an archaeological perspective was carried out that yielded positive results. The fossil remains of 16th century ceramic materials appeared that could only correspond to materials from the settlement on the hillside next to Playa Damas, Nombre de Dios, and description of the area and its location. We conclude that the only populated place that could temporarily coincide with ceramic findings has to be Santiago de Príncipe, and that's the city that when you go look that up, known as the first Cameroon city. That's how they hide North America. Again, African Muslim slaves who come over here during the last slave trade bring Islam. So any evidence of Moorish America that they find, that's how they gonna explain that to you why that's here. And it's so much they spread it out to different historical references that you can write a book alone on that evidence, right? We know that person here before that time period. We need some more architects. Texas in Cuba. Showing alleged construction, but you can tell they already got a structure there, and they just built on top of it and around it. Got Michael Jackson in ancient Egyptian garb, ancient Moorish garb. Her man, his family had converted to Islam before he had passed. So in the Kingdom of Fez, we got a place called El Dorado in South America. El Rey Dorado, the Golden King. And you had um, a few of the kings of Fez had nicknamed as El Dorado, and this been why. So they turned into a mythical thing because of that. They cannot put more history in America. That's the war between Rome and Morocco. And the way they're waging that war is hiding the information from you, the history from you, and you use your own people to do it. Again, Museo de Oro. The gold coins from Andalusian come from the Kingdom of Fez. The Kingdom of Fez that we talking about got gold, a lot of it. We can see that to this day with these museums. If the other fairs had a bunch of museums of gold, then that would make a lot of sense. But it don't. This Kingdom of Fez do 10 museums in one area called Museum of Gold. On the side, Kingdom of Morocco. The other side, we got the Colombian gold. This side had gold too. Rio de Oro. La Minas, the land of the mines. So after we recap that last video, let's continue on. It's another place where they probably reconstruct the place a little bit, but the town's still there. As you can see, they coming on tours to see this thing. And we talked about Niebla. And this website write a whole article about the blacks of Niebla. So let's listen to this.
And Christianity, he was an ideal person. And he's told me several times when they bring in friends from the Middle East, they usually freak out because they have a lot of their meetings in buildings with crucifixes because the Catholic institutions dominate the environment. And it doesn't work out too well for them.
He talking about Arabs from Arabia, Saudi Arabia, Middle East, modernly coming to meet with the West African Muslims and the Muslims in Brazil, and seeing Catholic stuff around. But if they know the history, they'll know why. And we just gonna do a whole lot of videos explaining why we're talking about both of those aspects in America throughout our whole series right here. But just like the Moors in Brazil did, they ain't okay. We do our Islam how we want to do them in the West, like we've been doing. We don't need validations from nobody else. Again, especially in Brazil, because that's the head of the empire in that area. Unless they give them the withdrawal in 1920, that means they're in Chicago, like always in the West, not in the East.
So he says really his identity is one of the main factors that has drawn so many people to convert to Islam, mostly amongst black Muslims, or mostly amongst black Brazilians. And this isn't only the case in Salvador, where he runs this center. There have also been lots of Africans who have been trained within Africa and abroad, who have led communities in Rio and Sao Paulo. And again, their racial, ethnic, and historical identities and connections to African Muslim communities are really what allow them to do this. So I view it as historical and continued. Thank you.
All the people on the stage had a lecture, a small lecture in this video about African Muslims, or black Muslims as they call them, in South America. And they all coming from a Roman perspective, as if they came there from Africa and convert other natives and stuff. Like, man, but one of the dudes, the European dude, he been more truthful than them. Like, they told a lie with Rome by using terms like African slave Muslim. Man, the first man, the one who looked like they would call him the native based off how he looked. That's why the United States would call him the native. Like, he going back to the ancient times, the older times, and show why that in the Colombia, all of them deal with a different part. I think the sister deal with Venezuela, and he deal with Brazil, because they rampant. Even in our time, we just can't see it. But they gonna ask him two good questions. We're gonna look at the answers and listen to what he say. He's a researcher into Islam in Brazil amongst the darker skinned people, which basically Moorish Americans. But you know how Rome go, they wouldn't invite me out there because I too real.
Thank you very much. We have time for some questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. The last present, I'm quite intrigued by these revelations. Well, do you know whether there are some collections of manuscripts, either centrally or privately, by Brazilian Muslims? That is the first question. The second one is that I've come across some multilingual manuscripts from that part of the world. Some will be Yoruba, Hausa, whatever. And I wouldn't know whether that indicates any form of collaboration or, I mean, it's difficult to explain why you could have a manuscript in 3 or 4 languages. And I can almost tell you the family house of the man you show from Oyo, because I'm very familiar with those marks. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. Yes, with respect to the question about different languages, so these men like Paulo José Ferreira and Rufino, both of them were perfectly literate and fluent in Arabic, Portuguese, and Yoruba. So my guess is it wouldn't be too much of a surprise if it was actually written by one person. However, I do know that also letters could be written by somebody who was literate in Arabic, and then they could have had somebody else asking them to write things down. So it could be collaboration, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's just one person who is able to speak all of those languages at the same time. As far as collections go, I know the Federal University in Bahia has a fairly large collection of manuscripts there. And then I've heard from the leader of the Islamic Center and Mosque in Salvador.
You see the University of Bahia in Brazil. They got all those old records in there. They got them records now written in Arabic. We'll talk about that if we get there in this video. The Franco of America at that time.
That some of the descendants of the Malays still have some manuscripts in their own possession. So I think there are some individual collectors or individual families that have collections, and then the university. Unfortunately, most of it has been destroyed because when the Portuguese raided them, they would usually try to get rid of everything. So there isn't too much left, but I know that those are some places.
Thanks, Deej. That was really, really great. Could you talk a bit more about the influence that the Afro-Brazilian Muslim community had when they returned to West Africa? Because I know I'm familiar with the architecture.
You see, due to Roman Reconstruction understandings, they gotta call them returnees. But listen how he talk about these returnees. Ask yourself if that make any sense that these some damn returnees are just some Moorish Americans knowledgeable going to West Africa. You see, he say he already know about the architecture, knowing that they come from over here. Me and my mother explain all the different things that these Moors going to West Africa, which is the same thing that we were talking about. They just went to West Africa. They also went to Spain for throughout the decades and centuries. But he called them returnees, so I don't know if they got captured, rise up out of his mind, and both ships and went back to after themselves or whatever. But he won't explain all that. But listen to what you say.
Influence when they came back in Lagos and like Shita Bay Mosque and these kind of places. But could you say more about the influence that this group of returnees had in the Muslim communities and populations in West Africa?
Yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned, they were usually the first leaders, at least along the coast, because most of the Muslim populations in that area were a bit further north. So they were the ones who really brought and established the practice of Islam there. And then there were many more traders who came from the north and then settled with them afterward. Another important aspect of it was because they were so connected with trade all along the coast of West Africa, they brought in quite a lot of money. Architecture was naturally something that followed because they were very, very wealthy. I think another interesting part of it is also Western education, because many of them had become fluent in at least one, if not two, European.
That's why we speak English over here and French and Spanish and all that. We've been taking this to West Africa too. Basically, nothing but forms of Latin. So those Latins were the form because language changed over time. So he calling it European, but it would make more sense that if we've been speaking Latin on this continent, that Latin would change to French, English, Spanish, just like he did in the Italic, Latin speaking Romance languages in Europe. They are speaking Latin, and then those languages form into the ones we know today. Ain't nobody gotta teach nobody else another language. Your language gonna change to the ones you recognize. But that makes sense because we did went into Europe and into Africa, so that's why those Romance languages is in these places. And he's just explaining that they bring them that too, and they bring them basically the architect, and he said they're wealthy. So they're wealthy. I don't know how they just are returnees and not just Moors who still traveling.
Languages. They were also some of the first to provide their children with Western education as well, so Western and Islamic education. And at least in the case of Nigeria, some of these returnees, or the descendants of returnees, were the first ones to push the British colonial government to provide some of those kind of hybrid schools that combined Western education with Islamic education.
Basically, Liberia ain't the only group of Moorish Americans who gone to Africa. He talking about Moors in Brazil taking Islam over there, and what he call it Europeanized education. But that just us. We over here, and we like that. We over here with them sciences. They ain't have to come from Europe. They just call it that because it's Western civilization. We create that Western civilization.
And so I think they were ones who sort of straddled this world of modernity, kind of European modernity, and traditional Islamic practices.
So we had fedoras and we had suits on and shit like that. So he think we bringing that to Africa from Europe. No, we bring that from America. That's us. But it ain't even far-fetched because if you look at West Africa today, they're more influenced by us than the people in eastern parts of the continent, even to this day. That ain't changed. And also why you get DNA tests, the highest relations you got on the world, out of all people in the world, is the people of what they call sub-Saharan Africa, because that's the closest thing to them ships for them Moors of this part of the empire. The head of the empire is right here, and it's the closest place to where what they say, these areas right here is going to be the most related people going to be right here, but since this whole continent is Moorish America, we are related on this continent, and then we are related to the kingdoms that we set up here. That's our second most highest relations, and then our most other highest relations is up here, based off the travels up here, the trades, and then right here, of course, North Africa. If they test those tribes up there, stop calling themselves Saharan Africans, then we'll be able to see our relations with those Moors on DNA tests. That's the Pisa family house. And you see they got the kiosks outside. So again, like Johnny Aborigine, they beat around the bush and they use terms like Maroons and Black Indians, and they use any term except for Moor. That's all Rome want them to do. I will get too much into why. If you just we can keep going, but we watch that video for why. But a Maroon cap, 1727. You see how you got American Indians and Negroes. That's how you got confusion. Because what we supposed to believe in two groups of people? Anyway, you see sea towns, shipping and sailing sea towns going on all across the Americas of these Moors. Fort Worth, Texas. And you see closes at May 31st. That means after this, there's about to be the new Fort Worth, Texas Mall. After they knocked out some of the Moorish aspects of it. I know they turn this one too specifically, but if you're in Fort Worth, you probably gonna find it. Huge building. Another one, the Sioux City Corn Palace. Alexander Dumas Estate. I'm trying to hurry up and make this short because after you're done recording long videos, YouTube will let me upload them so fast. In this time period, the language of the Moorish Latin by force of edict, became erroneously known as and deceptively called Spanish. This was due to the church bull edict issued by Philip II in 1511, in which he declared that the Moors would no longer be called Moors, but would be relinquished of all wealth, all property, all literature, and all other things that were of wealth and value. The bull alluded that all that is Moorish will be claimed by Spanish and the church, and thus called Spanish. So that's when everything became called Spanish now. You gotta understand, ain't been no Spain. Even in 1491 and 92, they're still making steel and Aragon on paper. So the history books, when they write these stories, they're gonna write Spain. They're gonna change things to the popularized version of everything. And these been done by edicts. We already talked about edicts that change everything that's to be Indian, everything that's to be moral to Indios. In the 15th century, Niebla was the head of the county, linked to the Guzman family. The scribe wrote in 1493, the white neighbors complained that the many liberties and frankness that the third Duke of Medina Sidonia Don Juan de Guzman ordered to give and gave to the blacks, including having their own mayor, I, the justice of itself. To which the Duke replies that his father, recently deceased, ordered to bring. He's saying bring, he's talking about from the parts of Allende where Brazil and his trading post that he had. This is the town of Niebla, right? Whom the nobles referred to as Moors. You see, the crowd, the masses use terms like black, Indian, all these other terms. But the people, the sovereigns of the land, the people who got knowledge, who know these people are Moors. Every other thing show that person who accepting to be called anything else other than Moor, and the person who's calling that ignorance or some kind of enslavement going on. Because the nobles referred to as Moors. The populate my town in Niebla, who live and dwell there and are my vassals. The Duchess and these vassals, these Moorish vassals of Niebla, they about to get they about to get attacked by Castile. But at the gate, they give up vassalage, but they said they only would give them up to the Duke of Medina Sidonia and not her. But she accepted that because all she had wanted been the secrets and the ports of America. That's where these Moors were from, in that in Niebla and Palos and those southern Granada states that get taken over. In that story, the conquest of Granada. That's a part of it. That's some of the details that happen. These literally Moorish Americans in Andalusia at that time didn't know how to sail. The Duchess of Medina Sidonia Isabel Alvarez Toledo affirmed that this is the first document that refers to the arrival of blacks to the Huelva estuary. The anthropologist Isidoro Moreno assures that that the brotherhood, such as those of the Negritos of Seville, at the end of the 14th century and the beginning of the 15th century, served as an axis of ethnic resistance, even more as a cover to preserve ties of union as important as their ancestral rights. So they were trying to hold on to those old Moorish understanding of themselves. They were trying to hold on to their own birthright and heritage, but they were trying to do wrong because they know Rome know it. They just reconstruct it, but they still were trying to keep Rome the understanding that we know who we are, so they create their brotherhoods and stuff like that to basically be themselves in secret in a hostile environment. They don't. We see that in the last little event. Now you probably see a lot more where the Moors been dealing with the Masonic thing to hide to keep the signs and also hide from the Inquisition. So practicing Islam in secret, which for all the Guzmans and them are doing too. And that's why they been giving these rights to these Moors and stuff like that because they already been converted just like them. Niebla, the gates of Niebla. And you see on the shield, you got the calamari on the shield showing that they've been Americans. And they had a King Calamari, an ancient Americans in Spain. You see at the gates, these people, more squads going on. You see Moors on both sides of the battle. And after these battles, that's when Niebla get populated with some of the Moors from America that we just finished talking about. With the Guzman bringing them after these battles. Some of the different batters. Wixology is another historical science that you can get experts from who expert in their own little specific historical science like geography. Some may be experts in archaeology, some in linguistics, some military, general history, war history. They just follow battles. Some people just deal with flags and crests. That's how you do history. You go to specific experts and see what they say about things. Because they're the more expert in that subject. All they study is that one thing. Yeah, been canceled. So I'm gonna save this for the next one, and start right here. The series getting too long, but let's continue before we get to other parts of the kingdom.